Welcome to the podcast summary of Hyazinth Graf Strachwitz. Today's story is about Hyazinth Graf Strachwitz, a German aristocrat and armored commander whose life pulled together privilege, brutality, battlefield fame, and deep political compromise. He survived a wildly harsh captivity in the First World War, built a reputation for daring tank warfare in the Second, and did it all from firmly inside the world of nationalist and Nazi politics, not at arm's length from it. And by the end, the record gets even messier, with personal ruin, disputed claims about resistance to Hitler, and the awkward question of what exactly military brilliance means when it serves a regime like that. Strachwitz didn't just think of himself as an officer. He thought of himself, very consciously, as an aristocrat. He reportedly preferred being called Herr Graf over Herr Leutnant, which tells you a lot right away. Rank mattered, but lineage mattered too, maybe more. That identity was tied to real power on the ground. He was heir to a huge Silesian estate, more than 4,100 hectares of land and forest. And he wasn't just sitting on it as a title holder. He worked on agricultural and forestry modernization and founded dairy cooperatives, so his world was military service mixed with landed management in the old European noble style. Then the First World War hit, and his experience in it was extreme, even by the standards of a war that had no shortage of extreme stories. After a reconnaissance mission far behind French lines, he was captured while wearing civilian clothing, nearly executed as a spy, and sentenced to 5 years of forced labor in Cayenne. What followed was torture, solitary confinement, repeated escape attempts, starvation during transport, and serious illness. It sounds less like a conventional prisoner story, and more like a chain of punishments that just kept going. He only got out through an international Red Cross medical intervention that moved him to Switzerland, and even then he avoided extradition by pretending to be mentally ill until the war ended. So before he was ever known as a tank commander, he'd already lived through a very hardening kind of ordeal. The post-war period didn't mellow him out. It pushed him toward militant anti-communism and German nationalism. He joined the Freikorps and took part in crushing the Spartacist uprising, then fought in the 1921 Silesian uprisings, including the German assault on Annaberg. That matters because it places him in the paramilitary, revanchist politics that helped shape interwar Germany. By 1932, he joined the Nazi Party, and in 1933, the Allgemeine SS. The idea seems to have been that party membership would help him defend Upper Silesian agricultural interests. Whatever the motive, the larger point is pretty plain. His later military fame grew within the political system of Nazi Germany, not in spite of it and not outside it. Strachwitz became famous for a style of armored leadership that was aggressive, personal, and very forward. His line was that tanks must be led from the front. That sounds dramatic, because it is dramatic, and sometimes it produced the kind of story that turns into legend. In France, one of his so-called solo runs ended with him persuading a French commander to surrender around 600 soldiers and their vehicles. On the Eastern Front, the numbers attached to his units got even bigger and more intense. At Kalach, his regiment was credited with destroying more than 270 Soviet tanks and artillery pieces in 48 hours. And in another engagement near Stalingrad, his forces reportedly knocked out 105 T-34s. Even allowing for the usual caution around wartime claims, that's the basis of his reputation. Fast, high-risk armored action, often pushed to the edge. He was decorated again and again, receiving the Knight's Cross, then oak leaves, swords, and diamonds, which put him near the very top of Nazi Germany's military honor system for most of the war. He was also wounded 12 times and kept returning to combat, which only strengthened the image of him as the commander who was always right there in it. But that reputation wasn't universally admired by other soldiers. Even in armies that reward boldness, there's a line where boldness starts looking reckless, depending on who's watching and who's paying the price. On the first day of Kursk, Panzer Commander Karl Decker called Strachwitz's handling of the Grossdeutschland tanks idiotic, which is not subtle criticism. Autocarius pushed back and argued that the heavy losses were the cost of urgent operations that saved other units. So even among experienced armored officers, the argument was already there. Was he a necessary risk-taker in brutal circumstances, or a commander whose style could burn through men and machines too fast? Probably one reason this question sticks is that both sides of it fit the evidence. He was clearly effective, and he was clearly operating at a very high level of hazard. After a severe arm injury in 1943, his role changed, but he didn't disappear. He returned to senior armored command at Narva, where his battle group helped split and partly destroy a Soviet bridgehead. For those operations, he received the diamonds to his Knight's Cross on 15th of April 1944. Late in the war, his work shifted away from classic tank leadership and toward improvisation, which says a lot about where Germany was by then. In 1945, he organized a Panzerjäger force of roughly 8,000 men using small combat groups and Panzerfausts to ambush Soviet tanks, including actions behind enemy lines. It's a very different picture from the earlier image of sweeping armored attacks. By then it was more fragmented, more desperate, and more about trying to blunt a much stronger enemy with whatever methods were still available. The war wrecked his personal world along with everything else. His youngest son was killed in action, his wife died after being struck by a U.S. military truck, and his Silesian estate was confiscated by Poland. He was released from Allied captivity in June 1947 and rebuilt his life in Bavaria, but the old world he came from was gone. Then there's the question of whether he was ever tied to a military resistance plot against Hitler. General Hubert Lanz described a plan in which Strachwitz's tanks would have surrounded or killed Hitler. But Strachwitz's cousin said he regarded killing Hitler as murder, and historian Hans Joachim Röhl doubted the plot existed in the form described. So that part stays unresolved, and maybe that's fitting. With figures like this, the record rarely settles into something neat. You end up with a man of obvious nerve and ability, shaped by aristocratic self-belief, hardened by captivity, celebrated for battlefield skill, and deeply embedded in the machinery and politics of Nazi Germany. That combination is why Strachwitz is hard to file away as either a simple war hero or a simple villain. The military story is real, and so is the political one. Sometimes history gives you clean lines. Sometimes it gives you a tank commander who insisted on being called Count. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.